think the role of the poet is? To be a cultural shaper, to shape the discourse, to change canons, to impose didactic, moralistic views on the world, or
I think, Adrienne, that is the most powerful question you could ask any poet. I really think it's. I hope you keep that in your interviews, and every time you run into a poet, ask that question, because it will help to define what poetry is all about. And I really have given it some thought lately, because there are schools of people who believe any one of those things, that poetry has to speak to the political life, that poetry has to speak to my life and how I see myself. I call it sometimes at its worst navel staring. That poetry has to shout out in pain and anger. That poetry has to be a small vision when I'm lying under a tree one day and I see the leaves fall. All of those and more are people's visions of what is out here as to what poetry is. It's a very hard thing to define, but I think that let's take a poet like Gwen Brooks, and let's take a poet like Robert Frost. When I read a Gwen Brooks poem, I know it's Gwen Brooks even if I don't see her name, because there's a style she uses, there's a voice she uses that connects so perfectly that I know this woman wrote this piece.
Is it gender related, though? Does it have to do with gender, though, or is it, you know, how she uses the command of the language, the words?
I think it's the voice.
It's the voice.
It's the voice. I mean, it's not gender related, because that fantastic poem she wrote, The Sundays of Saturday Smith, which is an incredible poem, and then on the other hand, she does We Real Cool, which everybody seems to think is the only thing she wrote, and I don't even think Gwen was happy about that half the time. But it is her voice that penetrates everything she writes, plus the language. She was a master at taking the language and recreating it. In Saturday Smith, she talks of Saturdays having hysterical ties. Now I'm thinking, well, who would ever think of taking the word hysterical and putting next to ties?
Exactly.
And with that, she told you a lot about that man. So she was so good at that. The essay that I've just written for Gwendolyn Brooks' Maud Martha, I dealt with that, how she used the language, and it betrays who the character is. Or let's take Robert Frost. There's no way you can see a poem without his name and know that he is Robert Frost. You don't have to see his name, because of his style and his voice. He liked to rhyme. There were certain things he did, and yet he had an immense statement about the condition of the world and the condition of himself within the world. And so I think, to me, the finest poetry is the poetry that does that. To me, the poetry that attracts me personally is the poetry that does that. There are other voices that are out here that attract other people, but I guess it depends on where the poet is coming from and what the poet's needs are and what the poet's talent is